When I was a young Trekkie those many years ago, the great question that gripped the fandom was, who is your favorite captain, Kirk or Picard? Even though we all had our preference, for many of us it was not an easy choice. But then, as the franchise expanded, the question became ever more complicated. When Deep Space Nine debuted and turned out to be awesome, it became, okay, who's your favorite, Kirk, Picard, or Sisko? At that point, for me at least, it became a much easier choice because it's obviously Sisko. But then came Captain Janeway on Voyager, and then Captain Archer on Enterprise, and now, with the rebooted movie franchise and the current generation of streaming series, there are even more choices to consider, including another Captain Kirk. And that's just if we limit ourselves to Starship captains who are the leads of their particular series. If you loosen that standard a bit, you also have to consider the likes of Spock, who was technically the captain of the Enterprise in Star Trek II, Lorca and Saru, who were the captains of the Starship Discovery before Michael Burnham got the big chair, and several others. And I have to admit, with all these additional choices, it's still obviously Sisko, but there's another question to be asked. Not who's your favorite captain, but rather, who's the best captain? More specifically, which captain is not only a great character, but also embodies everything we're told a starship captain should be. For me, the answer to this question is now also obvious. It's this guy. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't, but if you don't, listen up. Because I'm about to lay it all out and make my argument for why Christopher Pike is actually the ideal starship captain. I suppose I need to specify before I go on with this that I am referring specifically to Captain Pike as depicted in Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Strange New Worlds, played by Ensign Mount. Yes, he's the same character as the one seen in Star Trek, the original series, played by Jeffrey Hunter in The Cage and Sean Kenny as Beep Chair Pike in The Menagerie, but we only see Captain Pike in classic Trek for those 3 episodes, and the last 2 of those episodes are a 2-parter consisting mostly of clips from the first one. The creators of Disco and Strange New Worlds and Ensign Mount have crafted their own take on Pike, who, despite only appearing in 1 season of Discovery and, as of the time I'm producing this video, 1 season of Strange New Worlds, has already become a favorite among Trekkies like me, who are total saps for the whole Starfleet thing. So, he's who I'm talking about here. However, I would feel wrong if I didn't at least mention the other version of Captain Pike, the one we see in the first 2 films set in the Kelvin timeline, Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness, played by Bruce Greenwood. One of these days, I'd like to see if I can do a video just about that version of Pike, because I think the Kelvin timeline Pike is responsible for reviving interest in the character, and also because Bruce Greenwood is just awesome in general. He'll always be my nowhere man. Anyway, this is not that video. This is this video, and this video is about this version of that guy. Everybody got that? This? We meet this Captain Pike in Brother, the first episode of Star Trek Discovery's 2nd season. He arrives to take command of Discovery after the Enterprise is damaged while investigating the mysterious red bursts that have been detected across the galaxy. Right away, there's something different about him. He seems good in an uncomplicated way. It's not that the other characters on Discovery aren't good. They are, both in terms of being dramatically compelling and being on the side of good, but they also have a lot of baggage after the first season. Fairly or unfairly, Michael Burnham is blamed for starting a war with the Klingons, plus her boyfriend turned out to be a Klingon sleeper agent. Saru is a survivor from a planet where his species is culled for ritual sacrifices, where he'd probably be dead by now if he hadn't left to join Starfleet. Stamets tortured a giant space tardigrade to get his magic mushroom drive to work and saw his husband murdered. Plus, the previous captain of Discovery, Lorca, turned out to be secretly evil, and Burnham's captain before him, her longtime mentor, Philippa Georgiou, was killed, only for Burnham to later encounter her mirror universe counterpart, who was a galactic despot responsible for the mass murder and subjugation of billions of people. In other words, they've been through some pretty heavy shit. And they've done some morally questionable things. Into this group comes Captain Pike, a nice, sensitive, good-humored guy with great hair who respects the people under his command and can rattle off an impromptu speech about the values of Starfleet and mean every word. It's like Steve Rogers showing up to take charge of the Suicide Squad. One of the first things he does after assuming command of the ship is reassure his new crew that he won't betray them like Lorca did. Then he asks for a roll call, which is not only endearing and sound practice for any new captain, it's also helpful to us in the audience, since Discovery did such a lousy job of establishing most of its bridge crew in the first season. Seriously, how many of you watched that scene and went, "Reese! So that's his name!" So Pike introduces himself, acknowledges the crew's understandable trust issues, learns everyone's names, and projects a vibe that is authoritative and confident, but also self-effacing and approachable. What follows that introduction is, to date, still the best overall season of Star Trek Discovery, a show which, for the most part, I like very much. Pike's presence on Discovery not only brightens the tone of the show a bit, which it desperately needed after a dreary and bumpy and kind of grim first season, it also gives it a moral center. Pike is there not just to be the guy in charge of the ship, but to remind his crew and us of what their broader mission is and of the principles they have sworn to uphold while carrying out that mission. Which is not to say that the shadows, which have occasionally covered pretty much every character on Discovery, do not also fall on Pike during that second season. They do, particularly in one of the season's best episodes, Through the Valley of Shadows. Appropriate. I've talked about this episode before, particularly in my video about the darkest episodes of Star Trek, so I don't want to repeat myself here. The significance of this episode to the character of Pike is that this is where he learns what longtime Trekkies already knew, that he has some not-so-fun times ahead. We first learn of Pike's tragic fate way back in the first season of Star Trek, the original series, in the aforementioned two-part episode, The Menagerie, which, despite being produced after The Cage, is technically the first appearance of the character of Captain Pike since it aired in 1966, and The Cage wasn't broadcast in its original form until decades later. In The Menagerie, we meet Christopher Pike, James Kirk's predecessor as captain of the Enterprise, who has recently suffered a debilitating accident that has left him unable to move or speak on his own. He gets around and communicates with the help of a motorized wheelchair that is equipped with flashing lights accompanied by the sounding of a tone, enabling Pike to express himself through a simple code of 1 tone for yes and 2 for no. My best friend and podcasting colleague Jason Harding and I, displaying the empathy and sensitivity those who know us have come to expect, have nicknamed this crucial piece of life support equipment the beep chair, and you will rarely hear me refer to it in any other way. In Through the Valley of Shadows, which takes place about 9 years before the time of Star Trek the original series and Pike's accident, Pike touches a Klingon time crystal and sees a vision of his future in the beep chair. From that moment on, Pike is changed. He was always a tragic character, but before Through the Valley of Shadows, only we knew what fate was waiting for him. Now, Pike knows too. At the end of its second season, Star Trek Discovery does something unusual. Its main cast aboard Discovery travels nearly 1,000 years into the future for reasons that are too complicated to summarize here. It's sufficient to say it seemed like the best option at the time, but because the producers of the series wanted to save our first look at the 32nd century for the following season, Discovery's second season doesn't actually end with the crew of Discovery, but with Captain Pike and his crew back aboard the repaired Starship Enterprise. It's not a bad ending, but as I said at the time, instead of hooking you to want to see more of Discovery, it feels like a tease for a completely different show, a show which did not exist. Fortunately, a couple of years later, the producers of the current generation of Star Trek said, what if that show did exist, actually? And Anson Mount returned to the role of Captain Pike along with Ethan Peck as Spock and Rebecca Romijn as Number 1, who had also appeared in Discovery Season 2, and a bunch more characters, some familiar, some brand new, for Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which in its first season turned out to be the best Star Trek show since Deep Space Nine. In Season 1 of Strange New Worlds, Pike's knowledge of his approaching fate is a major part of his character arc. Picking up a few months after the end of Discovery's second season, Pike knows he has less than a decade left of his life as it is, but while that knowledge does impart an acute feeling of poignancy to Pike's character, and he does have some dark moments throughout the season, Pike doesn't become a grim or brooding character. Overall, he remains the same man we met in Discovery's second season. Charming, affable, quick with a joke, compassionate, selfless, brave. Only now he has an added depth because underneath those optimistic and heroic qualities, we know the weight he carries. Some of Pike's most stirring moments during the first season of Strange New Worlds have to do with how he responds in the face of his looming fate. In the series premiere, also titled Strange New Worlds, he has visions of his future self, confined to the beep chair, face scarred, screaming inarticulately in despair. He is haunted, but he is also determined to make the most of the time he has left before the accident, to do what good he can, and enjoy the journey as long as it lasts. Still, from time to time, he wonders if his fate might be changed. That faint, forlorn hope plays a part in one of the best episodes of Season 1 of Strange New Worlds, Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach. The Enterprise is in the neighborhood of the planet Majalis when Number 1 receives a distress call from a ship that is under attack in orbit of a nearby moon. Pike tries to talk the attacking ship into knocking it off, but the attacker isn't interested in talking, and after a brief exchange with the Enterprise, it's sent crashing to the moon. They beam over the occupants of the ship that was being attacked, and Pike is surprised to find that one of them is Alora, a woman Pike met years ago. Alora's two companions are Gamal, a Magellan elder, and a child called the First Servant, who is regarded by their people as a holy figure. They were on their way back to Majalis from a little field trip on the moon when they were attacked. Alora suspects it may have been part of an attempted ransom plot by people from a nearby colony, and since the Enterprise was attacked by the same ship that attacked Alora's ship, Pike decides to conduct an investigation, despite the evident unease of Alora at their continued presence. She explains that the Magellans are a very private people. I wonder why that is. Pike and Alora carry out the investigation, which eventually leads them to the amazing floating capital city of Majalis. At one point, Alora is attacked by a guard who is implicated in the plot to abduct the First Servant. Pike pulls his phaser, but he doesn't need to worry because Alora gets out of that situation no problem. Pike is so impressed by that, he's like, "Can we have sex?" And they do, because my boy Chris has a little Kirk in him, which is why Alora ends up with a little Pike in her. Pike and Alora are in bed following the act. And during the course of their post-intercourse chat, he tells her about his revelation of his fate, and that there's a beep chair in the future with his name on it. Allura says, here on Majalis we have some pretty advanced medical technology, so even if you can't prevent the accident that puts you in the beep chair after it happens, you could always come here and we could probably help you. Sounds like a pretty good deal, but there is a catch. Because Majalis is such a closed society, in order to receive the benefit of their advanced medical science, which, as we have seen elsewhere in the episode, is indeed quite impressive, he would have to leave Starfleet and move to Majalis permanently. Maybe not an ideal situation, but a viable option. And Pike seems to consider it. Briefly. Then he learns what the deal is with the first servant. Elder Gamal, it turns out, is the first servant's father, and is also part of the plot to abduct him and take him away from Majalis. But the conspirators aren't after ransom. They're acting in the best interests of the child. See, the time has come for the first servant to ascend. Allura has been evasive about what exactly that means. When Pike is invited to attend the ascension ceremony in the capital city after the first servant is finally returned to Majalis, he finds out. The ascension ceremony takes place in what the Majallans call the sacred chamber, where the machinery that keeps the floating city, floating, is located. As the first servant is being led to a throne, a couple of guards carry something away on a stretcher. Pike looks and sees that the thing on the stretcher is the lifeless husk of what clearly used to be a child. Horrified and outraged, Pike tries to fight his way to the throne, but he's knocked out by another guard as the first servant is plugged into the machines. Pike regains consciousness in Allura's quarters and immediately starts back to the sacred chamber to unplug that kid and get him the hell out of here, but Allura stops him before he even gets out of the room. You'll never get past the guards to reach the chamber, she says, and even if you did, if you disconnected the first servant now, it would only kill him. So, why does your floating city run on children? Pike asks. And Allura just kind of shrugs and says, it's been that way for as long as anyone can remember. Our founders set it up that way. We've explored alternatives, but I don't know, nothing else seems to work as well as just sticking a bunch of wires into the brain of a terrified little kid. Does he suffer? Pike asks. And Allura says, well, yeah, he suffers, but at least we admit it. I bet lots of people suffer in your precious Federation, too, while the rest of you turn a blind eye. Here, only one person suffers at a time, and we don't look away. Pike is not persuaded, but Allura says, maybe you'll change your mind in the future. And Pike calls for a beam out, leaving behind Majalis and Allura, and the possibility that Magellan medicine could heal him after his accident. By the way, it turns out that the nearby colony where the plot to abduct the first servant originated is populated by people who left the floating city because they weren't cool with living in a society that was based on the intentional brutalization of an endless series of children, which would make those colonists the ones who walked away from Majalis. Flew spaceships away from it. Same thing. Anyway, Pike is shown a possible way out of his bleak future. Not a way of escaping the accident, but a way of recovering from it. And he turns it down, because in order to accept that recovery, he would also have to accept what the Majallans do to the first servant. This is Pike's integrity. This is how principled Pike is. And this is also how fiercely compassionate he is. One of my favorite beats from Pike in Season 1 of Strange New Worlds is right after he comes to at Allura's place near the end of the episode. The very first thing he does is try again to save the first servant. Gets knocked out, wakes up. The first thought in his head is, I gotta get that kid out of there. That, my friends, is a hero. Wouldn't you want him to be the captain of your starship? Of course, being a moral person, having a sense of justice, having the strength and courage to actually live by your values, to fight for the rights of others, these are all qualities that a good starship captain, or generally speaking, a good leader ought to have. But a captain should also care about the people on his ship, the people whose well-being he's responsible for. Strange New Worlds lets us see that side of Pike, too. The second episode, Children of the Comet, establishes that Pike hosts regular dinner parties in his quarters, to which he invites not only his senior staff, but also junior members of the Enterprise crew like Cadet Uhura. He maintains easy, cordial relationships with his command officers, especially Number 1, Spock, and Helm Officer Lieutenant Ortegas. The casual rapport he enjoys with Ortegas in particular is a joy to watch. This is a captain who knows and respects his crew, and that respect clearly runs both ways. These people have served together, they're comfortable with each other, they trust each other. The best episode of the first season of Strange New Worlds, the best episode of any Star Trek show since Deep Space Nine went off the air, is episode 4, Memento Mori. The entire episode is fantastic, but there are 2 moments of special relevance to the subject of this video. The first comes near the end, after the Enterprise has narrowly escaped an encounter with the Gorn. Uhura and Hemmer, the ship's chief engineer, have been trapped in a cargo bay with a damaged piece of equipment that is about to explode. To distract the Gorn, and also save themselves, they eject the damaged equipment just before it explodes by decompressing the cargo bay. The maneuver pays off, and the Enterprise is able to get away, but once things settle down, the fates of Uhura and Hemmer are unknown. Were they blown out into space by the decompression? Were they harmed by the explosion? Or were they able to survive? Pike calls down to the cargo bay and waits intently for an answer. Nothing. Assuming his officers are dead, Pike somberly turns to Chief of Security La'an and is about to have her send a recovery team to the cargo bay when Uhura answers his call to report that she and Hemmer are okay. Pike's palpable relief is one of the most moving moments of the entire season. You can feel how much he cares about his crew. The second moment from Memento Mori I want to highlight comes from earlier in the episode and speaks not to Pike's love of his crew, but to his intelligence and his awareness that a crew needs a captain who seems in control and like he knows what he's doing, even when he doesn't. The Enterprise is being pursued by a small fleet of Gorn ships. Damaged, unable to fight or fly to safety at warp speed, Pike opts to hide and orders the ship into the atmosphere of a nearby brown dwarf. The Gorn ships continue to give chase, with the Enterprise's hull on the verge of buckling from the pressure as they dive deeper and deeper. One of the Gorn ships moves to within striking distance. Fearing that the Gorn are about to begin boarding the Enterprise, a grimly determined Pike orders the crew to battle stations and to prepare for hand-to-hand combat. Then, suddenly, the approaching Gorn ship buckles under the pressure and is destroyed. Pike, who is facing away from the rest of the crew toward the main view screen, looks confused? Surprised? Relieved? Then he turns to La'an and reminds her that she previously told him the Gorn are relentless hunters who stop at nothing. You used that against them, La'an says. And Pike plays it off like drawing in the Gorn ship so it crumpled under the pressure was his plan all along, and he's the baddest motherfucker in the galaxy with ice water in his veins. Now, there is more than one way to interpret this moment. You can read it as Pike intentionally drawing the Gorn in, hoping their ship would succumb to the pressure, and he ordered the crew to battle stations just in case his plan didn't work. But when I watch that scene and I see that reaction shot of Pike after the destruction of the Gorn ship, I read it as meaning that he did not expect that to happen. He thought he was about to have Gorn running around his ship killing people, and he was preparing himself psychologically to go down fighting, maybe even thinking to himself, well, I guess the time crystal was wrong after all. Then the Gorn ship implodes, and his reaction, which we see but the crew does not, is essentially, oh, thank God. However, being the great captain that he he doesn't show that to the crew. He pulls himself together, turns around, plays it cool, and acts like that was the plan all along because he knows that even in a crisis as urgent as this, in fact, especially in a crisis as urgent as this, the crew needs to know that their captain has the guts and the brains to get them through this. So that's what he shows them. And they believe him. Why shouldn't they? He's Captain Pike. But even with all the awesomeness he brings to the first season of Strange New Worlds, for my money, Pike's finest moment is still to be found back in Discovery Season 2. It's the moment that inspired me to start thinking of him as the platonic ideal of a Starfleet captain. It's from Through the Valley of Shadows, right after he first touches the time crystal. Again, if you haven't seen the episode, I'm not going to go into detail here. What you need to know is, in order to stop the season's big bad from destroying all life in the galaxy, why do current era Star Trek heroes keep having to stop their villains from doing that, by the way? I wonder how Amanda Plummer is going to try to destroy all life in the galaxy. Anyway, in order to stop that from happening, the crew of Discovery need to take their ship into the future. In order to achieve time travel, they need a time crystal, and the only place you can get time crystals is at the Klingon monastery on Boreth, where apparently they grow them. Pike visits the monastery, and Tenavik, one of the monks, guides him to one crystal in particular, a crystal that seems to respond to Pike's presence. This is the time crystal meant for Pike, the only one he can remove from the monastery. It's this one or nothing. Before Pike reaches for the crystal, Tenavik warns him of the consequences, telling him that he is about to lift the veil between the present and the future, and doing that could lead to madness. Pike touches the crystal and has a vision of the accident. He's in the engine room of a damaged ship, trying to help cadets escape. There's fire and explosion. Then Pike finds himself in a darkened corridor, facing himself in the beep chair. Deeply shaken by what he's seen, Pike pulls away from the time crystal. Tenavik tells him he doesn't have to take the crystal. He can leave it and walk away from the future he saw. But if he takes the crystal, his fate, as foretold, will be sealed. Pike pulls himself together. He says, talking to himself, "You're a Starfleet officer. You believe in service, sacrifice, compassion, and love." Then he turns to Tenavik and says, "I'm not going to abandon the things that made me what I am because of a future that contains an ending I hadn't foreseen for myself. No, give it to me." And Tenavik, impressed by Pike's conviction and commitment, gives him the crystal. It's one of the most selfless and heroic acts we have ever seen from a Star Trek character, and if you've been watching this shit as long as I have, you know that covers some ground. Pike taking the time crystal is right up there with Spock sacrificing himself to save the ship at the end of Star Trek II. Maybe that sounds like an overstatement to some of you, but think about it. Pike sees his future. He's horrified by it. He's given the opportunity to walk away from it, to avoid it. But he knows that if he does that, the cost paid by everyone will be unimaginably greater. So he takes the crystal. He willingly chooses a future that will be defined by grievous injury and disability, trading the life he could have had for a chance to save others. It's classic Star Trek. It's heroism in its purest, most elemental, most moving form. It's the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Pike's fate would be tragic if it happened to most people, but after seeing him in Discovery and Strange New Worlds, it feels doubly tragic because it happens to him. He's not just a good captain, he's a good person. That Pike is destined to be grievously injured and become dependent on a beep chair for the rest of his life is what makes him tragic. That he chooses that destiny to serve the greater good is what makes him noble. That he resolves to make the most of whatever time he has left is what makes him a role model. Christopher Pike is proof that, written properly, good guys can make great characters, and he is the embodiment of everything a Starship captain, a leader, a human being should be. He's Superman without the superpowers. He's principled, compassionate, self-sacrificing, good-humored, caring, genuinely interested in the lives and well-being of those under his command, and possessed of an optimism so strong, so stubborn, so undying, that it drives him to keep striving toward the light even as the darkness begins to fall around him. Although, as a few of you have pointed out when I've discussed this in past videos, the menagerie not only puts Pike in the beep chair, it also gives him somewhat of a happy ending. Thanks to Spock, Pike is able to return to Talos 4, the planet he visits in the cage, where the Talosians, through their mental powers of illusion, are able to free him from the beep chair by giving him the illusion of being as he was before the accident. So, kind of like the deal he walked away from on Majalis in Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach. He ends up in the beep chair and his Starfleet career is over. Once he arrives on Talos 4, he must remain there, but he undergoes a kind of healing that enables him to transcend his physical disability, and presumably he lives out his days in happiness with Vina, in whatever sort of life they imagine for themselves. Of course, Pike doesn't know that part. He didn't know that part when he took the time crystal, and his sanctuary among the Talosians is only possible because to make it happen, Spock risks his own career and life. Violating the quarantine around Talos 4 is a death penalty offense. In showing us who Pike is, Discovery and Strange New Worlds have allowed us to understand why Spock would be willing to go to such lengths for his former captain. As played by Jeffrey Hunter in The Cage, Pike seems like a good enough guy, but a bit of a stiff. You just kind of have to take it as an article of faith that Spock's loyalty and respect and, if you'll forgive me, Spock, feelings for Pike are deep enough to motivate him to act as he does in the menagerie. Once you get to know Anson Mount's version of Pike, however, no faith and no explanation are necessary. You get it. Of course Spock would put it all on the line to help him. He's Captain Pike. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but before I do that, I want to give shoutouts to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Robert C. Watson, thank you Robert. Chaotic Neutral, thank you Chaotic Neutral. Chief Luck Dragon, thank you Chief Luck Dragon. Robert T. Estes, thank you Robert. Blake Hurlbert, thank you Blake. Dennis Hirth, thank you Dennis. Thomas Wright, thank you Thomas. Kenzie Woodbridge, thank you Kenzie. Kristen McKee, thank you Kristen. Todd DC, thank you Todd. John Hamilton, thank you John. Owen Wildish, thank you Owen. Next, new channel members. They are Jason Pelath, thank you Jason. Luck Dragon, thank you Luck Dragon. Akaman211, thank you Akaman211. Zappo, thank you Zappo. Abby Noel Carter, thank you Abby. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon, or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift rather than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, to next month's Regulation Trek Actually topic, and I must admit, I did stack the deck a little this time. I didn't do anything to give any one topic an advantage over the other, but next month is the start of the third and final season of Star Trek Picard, and I thought it would be appropriate to do a video about Jean-Luc Picard. So all the options in the last poll were Picard related. Because come hell or high water, I am gonna do a goddamn Picard video next month. And the topic of that video, chosen by my patrons and members who voted in the latest poll, is who is actually Captain Picard's greatest nemesis? Ooh, lots of intriguing possibilities there. Should be fun. That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then, so until the next time I see you, whenever that is, thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.